I'm standing on stage at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Mason Wells Foundation, cameras flashing, my 6-year-old son beaming beside me. 1 year ago, I was locked in a psychiatric facility, drugged and powerless, while my father stole my inheritance. Today, his company is bankrupt, and I'm using the money he tried to steal to help kids like Mason who've survived family betrayal. But let me back up 18 months to when my entire world collapsed. I walked into the conference room at Chen & Associates expecting a routine family trust review. My grandfather had died 3 months earlier, leaving me $14 million. I was 33, a systems engineer, recently divorced, raising Mason alone. The money would change everything for us. My father, Dean, sat at the head of the table in his expensive suit, looking every bit the successful CEO. Aunt Vanessa was there, perfectly coiffed as always. My cousin Reed scrolled through his phone, barely acknowledging me. "Thanks for coming," Dean said, not looking up from his papers. "We need to discuss some concerns about the trust." I sat down, confused. "What concerns?" Grandfather's will was clear. "There are questions about your mental fitness to manage this amount of money." He slid a folder across the table. "Given your recent divorce and the stress of single parenthood, we think it's prudent to have safeguards in place." I stared at him. "Mental fitness? I'm a systems engineer. I manage complex projects. I've been financially independent since college." Vanessa touched my hand with false sympathy. "Sweetheart, we're just worried about you. You've seemed so withdrawn lately. So unemotional." "I'm not unemotional. I'm focused on raising my son and doing my job." Reed finally looked up. "That's exactly what we mean. You're always so logical, so detached. It's not normal." The absurdity hit me. They were pathologizing my competence. Because I didn't cry in public or share every feeling, I was mentally unfit? Dean showed up at my house 3 days later with Vanessa and a psychiatrist I'd never met. Dr. Lawrence had silver hair and a condescending smile that made my skin crawl. "We're concerned about you," Dean said, standing in my living room uninvited. "Dr. Lawrence has been reviewing your behavioral patterns." "My behavioral patterns? You had me evaluated without my knowledge?" Dr. Lawrence stepped forward. "Your family members have documented concerning behaviors. Social withdrawal, emotional flatness, inability to maintain relationships. These could indicate serious mental health issues." I laughed. It was so ridiculous. I'm a single mother with a demanding job. I'm not withdrawn. I'm busy. And my divorce was mutual and amicable. "See?" Vanessa whispered to Dr. Lawrence. "She doesn't take this seriously. She can't see how concerning her behavior is. I never agreed to this evaluation. You can't diagnose me based on my family's opinions." Dean's expression hardened. "We have documentation. Dr. Lawrence has recommended a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation. For Mason's safety, we think you should cooperate voluntarily." The threat was clear. Cooperate or they'd use my son against me. I asked them to leave. They did, but Dean's parting words chilled me. "We're trying to help you. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." 2 days later, at 9 p.m., there was a knock on my door. 2 men in suits stood there with a sheriff's deputy behind them. "Are you the person named in this order?" The deputy showed me papers. I scanned them, my heart racing. It was a court-ordered psychiatric hold. 72 hours of mandatory evaluation at Riverside Psychiatric Facility. Signed by a judge I'd never heard of, based on an emergency petition filed by Dean. "This is a mistake." "I never." "Ma'am, we need you to come with us now." Mason appeared in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes. "Mommy?" "It's okay, baby. Mommy has to go somewhere for a couple days. Grandpa will stay with you." Dean appeared from his car in the driveway. He'd been waiting. Planning this. I wanted to scream, to fight, to run. But the deputy's hand was on his weapon, and Mason was watching. If I resisted, they'd use it against me. Evidence of instability. So I went quietly, watching my confused son through the car window as we drove away. The home security footage would show me leaving calmly, cooperatively. They'd edited out my questions, my protests. Just a woman getting into a car. 72 hours became 91 days. The facility wasn't the horror movie version of psychiatric care. It was worse because it was clinical, professional, and designed to make you doubt yourself. They took my phone, my laptop, my connection to the outside world. They gave me medications I didn't need. When I refused, they noted lack of insight into illness. When I accepted to avoid forced injection, they noted medication compliance suggests awareness of condition. Every conversation was a trap. If I was calm, I was emotionally flat. If I showed frustration, I was agitated and potentially dangerous. If I asked questions about my release, I was fixated and paranoid. I lost my job. My company couldn't hold my position when I didn't show up for 3 weeks. My ex-husband, Tyler, filed for emergency custody of Mason, citing my hospitalization as evidence of instability. But they made a mistake. They gave me a notebook. And I kept detailed notes. Dates, times, names, exact quotes. Every medication forced on me. Every interview. Every evaluation that felt more like an interrogation. I documented everything because that's what systems engineers do. We gathered data. Dr. Nguyen came in my 3rd month there. She was an external evaluator, brought in to review long-term holds. She sat across from me with my file, her expression neutral. "Tell me why you're here." My father had me committed to gain control of my inheritance. She didn't react. "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth. Check the timeline. My grandfather died, left me $14 million, and within weeks I was here. Check the signatures on the commitment papers. Check who filed them." She made notes. "Your family says you exhibited paranoid delusions about money. I'm a systems engineer with a master's degree. I've managed my own finances for 15 years. The paranoia started when they tried to take control of my trust fund." Dr. Nguyen reviewed my file for 20 minutes in silence. Then she looked up. "These signatures don't match. The power of attorney filed for your assets has a notary stamp that doesn't exist in the state database. Someone forged this." 2 weeks later, I was discharged. All medication stopped. Diagnosis cleared. Administrative error, they called it. But the damage was done. My house had been sold to pay for care. My assets were moved to accounts I couldn't access. Mason had lived with Tyler for 3 months and didn't understand why I'd abandoned him. I moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment with nothing but my discharge papers and a rage so cold it frightened me. I didn't scream or make threats. I got a job. I applied to Data Secure Solutions under my middle name, Emma. They hired me within 3 weeks as a security analyst. I was overqualified, but I needed access to the tools they had. Database searches, asset tracking, digital forensics. At night, after Mason went to bed, I worked. I pulled credit reports and found accounts opened in my name. I accessed server logs through perfectly legal public records requests. I compiled emails from the trust administrator showing communication with Dean about managing her assets during treatment. Every piece of evidence went into encrypted files, backed up in 3 locations. I told no one, not even my lawyer yet. I needed to understand the full scope before I made my move. The pattern emerged quickly. Dean had funneled money from my trust through a charity under his name. The charity then made a large donation to a failing logistics company. That company was now being positioned as Dean's comeback business venture. He'd used my money to buy 49% ownership of a company he intended to take public. My $14 million inheritance was funding his empire. I traced the shell companies one by one. Dean was sophisticated but not careful enough. He'd left digital fingerprints everywhere. Wire transfers with reference numbers that matched. Email metadata showing coordination. Board meeting minutes mentioning new capital influx. I found the forged power of attorney Dr. Nguyen had flagged. It gave Dean legal authority to manage my assets while I was incapacitated. But the notary seal was fake, the signature wasn't mine, and the filing date was 2 days before I was committed. Which meant he'd planned this. All of it. The psychiatric evaluation, the commitment papers, the asset transfer. He'd created a legal framework to steal from me, and I'd walked right into it. I made copies of everything. Then I started researching Dean's company. Financial statements, investor reports, tax filings. All public record, all perfectly legal to access. The company was struggling. The comeback was smoke and mirrors. Without the influx from my trust, it would collapse within 18 months. Good. Let it collapse. But on my timeline, not his. Mason came home from school crying. He threw his backpack down and ran to his room. I found him under his covers, sobbing. What happened, baby? We had to draw pictures of our houses. I drew our old house, the one with my big room and the tire swing. Mrs. Peterson asked why we moved, and I didn't know what to say. I held him while my heart shattered. I'm sorry, Mason. I'm so sorry. Why don't we live there anymore? Dad says you got sick and couldn't take care of it. Tyler's words, weaponized through my 6-year-old. I chose my response carefully. Mommy had to go away for a little while, but I'm better now. And we're going to get everything back. I promise. That night, I documented Mason's confusion, his tears, his questions. I recorded the impact of Dean's actions on an innocent child. Because that was the unforgivable part. He hadn't just stolen from me. He'd traumatized my son. Aunt Vanessa called 2 weeks later, her voice dripping with false concern. I think we should talk. Clear the air. This family needs healing. I agreed to meet her for coffee, playing the role of the recovering victim who wanted peace. She ordered a latte and launched into her rehearsed speech about family loyalty and forgiveness. I nodded along, asking gentle questions, drawing her out. The important thing is you're better now, she said. We can move forward. I appreciate everyone's support during that time. It must have been expensive, all that care. Oh, well, family takes care of family. We used some of the trust money, of course, but that's what it's there for. My coffee cup paused halfway to my lips. The trust paid for the facility? Of course. Dean handled all the financial arrangements. He even funded our family retreat last month as a stress reliever. We all needed it after everything. There it was. She'd just admitted they used my money for personal expenses while I was locked away. That was thoughtful of him, I said, smiling. I tracked the transaction that night. $47,000 from an account that had been mine, transferred to a resort in Aspen, charged to Dean's credit card. I had the receipt, the bank transfer, and now Vanessa's admission on the voice memo I'd been recording on my phone. I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice. And justice required evidence that would hold up in court. I sent anonymous tips to the IRS. Nothing specific, just enough to trigger a routine audit of Dean's company. Questions about unusual capital infusions and charitable donations that didn't quite match the reported amounts. I leaked information about financial irregularities to a business reporter who covered corporate fraud. Not enough to trace back to me, just enough to plant seeds of doubt. Dean's company was scheduled to go public in 6 months. Investor confidence was crucial. I was systematically undermining that confidence with truth. The audit was announced 3 weeks later. Dean issued a statement calling it routine and promising full cooperation. But I could see the panic in the board meeting minutes that were filed publicly. Key investors were asking questions. I watched from my apartment, tracking every development, and smiled. The dominoes were starting to fall. Data Secure Solutions was hired to consult on cybersecurity for Dean's company ahead of the IPO. It was routine, necessary for going public. I volunteered for the project. My supervisor approved it. "You're one of our best analysts, Emma. Take the lead." I walked into Dean's offices wearing a visitor badge, carrying my laptop, completely unrecognizable from the unstable daughter he'd committed. I'd cut my hair, wore professional clothes I'd never owned before, used my middle name. The board was panicking about the audit. The meeting minutes showed they were worried about investor flight. Dean was insisting everything was fine, just paperwork issues. I sat in meetings, assessed their systems, and gathered more evidence. Access logs showing Dean's personal involvement in transfers. Encrypted files on the company server that shouldn't have been there. Communication about the asset acquisition that coincided exactly with my commitment. Dean passed me in the hallway once. Looked right at me. Didn't recognize his own daughter. That's when I knew I had him. He was so arrogant, so sure of his control, that he couldn't imagine I'd be standing in his office building, documenting his crimes from the inside. The letter from Dean's lawyer arrived on a Tuesday. Petition for permanent custody of Mason, citing my documented mental instability and inability to provide stable housing. Tyler had joined him. My ex-husband, who'd agreed to our divorce terms, who'd promised to co-parent peacefully, had signed on to Dean's petition. The betrayal burned, but I'd been preparing for this. I filed my counterclaim with 16 pages of documentation. Medical records from Dr. Nguyen showing the commitment was fraudulent. Cleared psychiatric evaluations from 2 independent doctors. Bank statements showing the asset transfers that preceded my hospitalization. And testimony from my employer showing excellent work performance. I also included evidence of Dean's financial crimes. Because if he wanted a custody battle, I'd make sure the judge knew exactly who was fighting for my son. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. Tyler called me the night after he was served with my counterclaim. "What the hell, Emma? You're accusing your father of fraud?" "I'm presenting facts. He stole from me, Tyler. He had me committed to cover it up. And you're helping him take our son." Silence. "Then, I didn't know about the money. He said you had a breakdown. Read the documents. All of them. Then decide if you really want to be part of this." He hung up. 3 days later, his lawyer withdrew from Dean's petition. While researching the trust documents, I found something that changed everything. A sealed file from 1994, buried in the family trust records. My mother's involuntary commitment papers. I'd been told she died of heart failure when I was 3. But these documents told a different story. She'd been committed to a psychiatric facility 6 months before her death. No autopsy was ever performed. No will. Just like me. I requested her death certificate. Cause of death, cardiac arrest during psychiatric treatment. Signed by Dr. Lawrence. The same psychiatrist who'd evaluated me. My hand shook as I read the commitment petition. Filed by Dean, citing her paranoid delusions about money and inability to care for her child. The same exact language used against me 30 years later. This wasn't just theft. This was a pattern. Dean had done this before, to my mother, and gotten away with it. I'd survived only because Dr. Nguyen had caught the forgery. I made copies of everything and sent them to a journalist who specialized in institutional abuse cases. She called me within hours. "This is enormous. If you're willing to go public." "Not yet. But soon. I need to finish gathering evidence first." Reed got sloppy. He and Vanessa met at a restaurant to discuss the situation. I'd hired a private investigator who placed a recording device at their table, perfectly legal in our state with one-party consent, and I was that party, having informed the restaurant staff I'd be recording my own meeting there. Their conversation was damning. "We need to lock down the rest of the fund before she does something public," Reed said. "Dean's working on it. The commitment was supposed to be permanent. That psychiatrist screwed up by bringing in the external review. What if she goes to the media? Who's going to believe her? She was institutionalized. We have documentation. I had the recording transcribed and filed a cease and desist through my lawyer. The letter was carefully worded, revealing just enough to terrify them without showing my full hand. Vanessa called me crying, begging me to drop it. This will destroy the family. The family destroyed itself when you helped lock me away to steal my inheritance. Reed tried a different approach. He offered to mediate between Dean and me. I agreed to meet him, wearing a wire. He proposed a settlement. I'd get $2 million, they'd keep the rest, everyone would sign NDAs. So I get 14% of what's mine, and you keep 86%? It's better than dragging this through courts and ending up with nothing. I'll take my chances. The IRS audit results were leaked to the press. Multiple family-linked accounts were frozen. Dean's name appeared in a high-risk transaction report involving offshore accounts and suspicious charitable donations. Dean held a press conference, his CEO persona in full effect. These allegations are politically motivated attacks by competitors trying to damage our IPO. We've done nothing wrong. Behind the scenes, the board was fracturing. 3 members resigned. The IPO was delayed indefinitely. Investors were pulling out. I watched it on the news from my apartment, Mason playing with blocks on the floor, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. The reporter called me. I've been investigating your father's company. I found connections to your commitment. Are you willing to talk on record? Not yet. But keep digging. You'll find everything you need in the public record. She did. Within a week, she'd traced the shell companies, the forged documents, the timeline of my mother's death, and my commitment. She published a preliminary article, A Pattern of Institutional Abuse, How One CEO Used Psychiatric Facilities to Control Family Wealth. It went viral within hours. Mason's school called me at work. He'd had a panic attack during recess. Another child had said, "Your mommy's crazy." My dad saw it on the news. I left work immediately and found Mason in the nurse's office, his face blotchy from crying. "Am I crazy, Mommy?" I held him tight. "No, baby. You're perfect. Some people say mean things when they don't understand the truth." The principal called Dean and me in for a meeting. Dean showed up in his expensive suit, playing the concerned grandfather. He smiled at me across the table. "I'm sure we can work this out privately. For Mason's sake." I looked him directly in the eyes. "This is your last warning. Drop everything, return what you stole, and walk away. Or I'll destroy you." "You're making threats now? In front of school administrators?" "I'm making promises. And I keep mine." The principal looked uncomfortable. "Perhaps we should focus on Mason's well-being." Mason's well-being was destroyed when his grandfather had his mother locked in a psychiatric facility to steal her inheritance. If you want to help Mason, start by acknowledging the truth. Dean's smile faltered. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. I filed for legal emancipation from the family trust, citing financial abuse and fraud. Under state law, this triggered an automatic forensic audit of all trust-related transactions. The auditors found $3.2 million in unaccounted losses, all traced directly to Dean's company and personal accounts. Payments labeled as medical care that went to luxury purchases. Administrative fees that funded family vacations. Investment management that was actually Dean's salary. The report was devastating. The trust administrator was fired. Dean's lawyer tried to claim it was all legitimate under his power of attorney. Except the power of attorney was forged. Dr. Nguyen's testimony confirmed it. The notary whose stamp appeared on the document testified he'd never notarized anything for Dean Chin. Dean was facing civil fraud charges minimum. Criminal charges were likely. The journalist published her full investigation. It included interviews with Dr. Nguyen, the notary, 3 former employees of Dean's company who'd witnessed suspicious transactions, and me. I spoke carefully, sticking to facts. My father had me involuntarily committed using falsified documents, then used a forged power of attorney to steal my inheritance while I was unable to defend myself. The same pattern occurred with my mother 30 years ago. This isn't a family dispute. It's systematic financial abuse using psychiatric facilities as weapons. The article had 2 million views in 24 hours. The board of Dean's company called an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, but I had access to the meeting minutes through my consulting role. I prepared a presentation, 47 slides of evidence showing systematic fraud, embezzlement, and misappropriation of funds. Transaction trails, forged documents, witness testimony. Everything cross-referenced and timestamped. I sent it anonymously to the board chairman the night before the meeting. The meeting lasted 6 hours. Dean tried to spin it as a family dispute, nothing to do with company business. But the evidence showed he'd used company resources to facilitate the fraud. Company lawyers to draft the forged documents. Company accounts to hide the stolen funds. The vote was unanimous. Dean was removed as CEO, effective immediately. He was placed on indefinite medical leave while investigations continued. The chairman's statement was brief: the board has lost confidence in Dean Chen's ability to lead this organization ethically and legally. Dean's empire crumbled in a single afternoon. Federal agents raided the company headquarters 2 weeks later. Wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, forgery. The charges kept multiplying. Dean was arrested on live television, perp-walked out of his office building in handcuffs. The CEO who'd built his image on success and control, reduced to a criminal being stuffed into a police car. Reed deleted all his social media accounts within hours. Vanessa's lawyer issued a statement: Ms. Vanessa Chen was misled by her brother and had no knowledge of criminal activity. But I had the recording. The paper trail showed she'd received $280,000 in gifts from Dean during my commitment. She'd known exactly what was happening. The prosecutor added her to the investigation. Tyler called me, his voice shaking. "I'm so sorry. I should have believed you from the start." "Yes. You should have. Is there anything I can do?" "Support Mason. Be his father. And never doubt me again." The civil suit trial was almost anticlimactic after everything else. My lawyer presented the evidence methodically. The forged documents. The financial transfers. The timeline of my commitment and asset seizure. Dr. Nguyen's testimony about the fraudulent commitment. Dean's lawyer tried to argue I'd been genuinely ill, that Dean had acted in good faith. But the evidence was overwhelming. The judge's ruling was swift. "This is one of the most egregious cases of financial abuse I've encountered. Mr. Chen used psychiatric institutions as weapons to steal from his own daughter and, 30 years prior, likely his wife. The pattern is clear and disturbing. Full return of the trust fund, $14 million. Triple damages for fraud, $42 million. Permanent custody of Mason, granted. Restraining order against Dean, Vanessa, and Reed, approved. Dean's company filed for bankruptcy 2 weeks later. Without his leadership and with mounting legal fees, it collapsed exactly as I'd predicted. I walked out of the courthouse with Mason's hand in mine, and for the first time in 18 months, I felt like I could breathe. The journalist who'd broken the story received a tip about other cases. She started digging and found 3 other family members who'd been involuntarily committed under suspicious circumstances in the past 20 years. All had inheritance disputes. All were committed by Dean or close associates. All had assets transferred during their hospitalization. 2 had died in facilities under questionable circumstances. My mother's case was now being investigated as potential homicide. Her exhumation was ordered. The scandal went national. Congressional hearings were called about psychiatric facilities being used for financial abuse. Laws were proposed to prevent involuntary commitments without multiple independent evaluations. I was asked to testify. I agreed. Standing before Congress, I told my story. I described the 91 days I lost, the son who thought I'd abandoned him, the career destroyed, the home stolen. And I described my mother, who never got the chance to fight back. This isn't just about my family, I concluded. This is about a system that allows powerful people to weaponize mental health care against vulnerable family members. We need safeguards. We need oversight. We need justice. The testimony went viral. #JusticeForEmma trended for 3 days. Dean's criminal trial was scheduled, but I made a different calculation. Criminal trials were unpredictable. Juries could be sympathetic. His lawyers might create reasonable doubt. I wanted certainty. I offered a settlement through my lawyer. Dean would plead guilty to all civil charges, forfeit all assets, issue public apologies to me and Mason, and permanently remove himself from any business or fiduciary positions. He'd be barred from ever managing anyone else's money. In exchange, I wouldn't push for maximum criminal penalties. He'd face reduced charges, likely probation instead of significant prison time. His lawyers jumped at the offer. Dean was broke, disgraced, and facing years in federal prison. This was his only way out. He signed everything. The apology was published in every major newspaper. I abused my position of power and trust to steal from my daughter. I used psychiatric institutions as weapons. I take full responsibility for my actions. Vanessa and Reed signed similar agreements, admitting their roles and forfeiting any claims to family money. It was over. Not with a bang, but with signatures on legal documents that destroyed them more thoroughly than prison ever could. Dean tried to contact Mason 6 months later. He sent a birthday gift, a toy train set with a card. To my grandson, with love from Grandpa. I returned it unopened with a note, Mason doesn't have a grandfather. Dean called from a restricted number. I answered only to tell him this would be his last warning. I just want to talk to my grandson. I've lost everything. Please. You lost everything because you stole everything. You don't get Mason. You don't get forgiveness. You don't get anything. I'm still your father. No. You're the man who locked me away and tried to steal my life. Forgiveness is for people who deserve it. You made your choice. Now live with it. I blocked every number connected to him, every email address, every possible contact method. Then I told Mason the truth, age-appropriately. Grandpa made very bad choices that hurt Mommy. Sometimes people we love do things that mean we can't be around them anymore. It's not your fault, and it's not because he doesn't love you. It's because love isn't enough when someone keeps hurting people. Mason hugged me. I'm glad you're okay, Mommy. Me too, baby. Me too. 1 year after my discharge, I stood on stage at the grand opening of the Mason Wells Foundation. The name was deliberate, Wells, my maiden name, the one I'd reclaimed legally after the trial. The foundation provided scholarships and legal aid to children who'd survived familial abuse, financial exploitation, and custody battles. We partnered with psychiatric reform advocates to push for stronger safeguards against involuntary commitments. The funding came from the settlement. $14 million returned to me, plus the $42 million in damages. I'd kept enough to secure Mason's future and mine. The rest went to helping others. Mason stood beside me at the ribbon cutting, wearing a suit that made him look so grown up. He held the giant scissors and grinned for the cameras. This foundation exists because one child asked me why we had to leave our house, I told the crowd. Because the damage my father did wasn't just financial. It was emotional. It was psychological. It stole Mason's sense of security and safety. This foundation is my promise that other children won't suffer alone. Forbes ran a feature on me, from psychiatric facility to philanthropist, how Emma Wells turned betrayal into justice. The reporter asked me the question everyone wanted to know. How did you stay so calm through everything? How did you not break? I thought about it carefully before answering. People think I stayed calm, I said to the Forbes reporter. But I wasn't calm. I was exact. I was sitting in my new home office, walls lined with certifications and awards. Mason's artwork covered one wall, colorful and chaotic and perfect. Outside the window, I could see him playing in our backyard, on the swing set I'd bought with money that was rightfully mine. When they locked me away, they made one critical mistake. They gave me time. Time to think, to plan, to document. They thought I was weak because I was logical. They confused silence with compliance. The reporter leaned forward. What kept you going during those 91 days? My son. Every night, I'd write notes about what I'd tell Mason when I got out. How I'd explain what happened. How I'd make sure he knew his mother fought for him. That became my evidence log. Every injustice I documented was another promise I'd keep to him. Do you consider this revenge? I shook my head. Revenge is emotional. This was justice. Revenge would have been destroying them because they hurt me. Justice was ensuring they couldn't hurt anyone else. Every law that changed, every safeguard put in place, every person helped by the foundation, that's not revenge. That's accountability. What would you say to people facing similar situations? Document everything. Stay methodical. Don't let anger make you sloppy. The system protects people who follow its rules perfectly. So follow them. Gather evidence. Build your case. And when you're ready, strike with precision. No regrets? I looked out at Mason, laughing as he went higher on the swings. My only regret is that I didn't see what my father was sooner. That I didn't protect my mother. But I can't change the past. I can only make sure the future is different. The article ended with a photo of me and Mason at the foundation opening, both of us smiling. The caption read, Emma Wells didn't just survive her father's betrayal. She transformed it into a legacy. That night, after Mason was asleep, I sat in my office and opened the folder I'd kept from the beginning. All my notes from the facility. Every document. Every piece of evidence that brought Dean down. I'd never thrown any of it away. Not because I needed it anymore, but because it reminded me of who I'd become. Not a victim. Not even a survivor. A strategist. A fighter. A mother who'd burned down an empire to protect her son. I'd won without breaking a single law. I'd dismantled everything my father built using nothing but truth and patience. I'd turned his greatest weapon, the psychiatric system, into his downfall by exposing how he'd abused it. And the best part? I never had to raise my voice. Only my standards. Mason was safe. The foundation would help hundreds of children. My mother's case had been reopened, and justice might finally come for her too. I closed the folder and locked it away. Not forgetting. Never forgetting. But moving forward. Because that's what you do when you win. You don't gloat. You don't celebrate destruction. You build something better from the ashes. And I'd built a life my father could never touch again. The end.